Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into 2 hours of Pokemon facts to fall asleep to, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always kind of magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. Like a Snorlax snap that spans the globe. 1 minute you're in London. The next, someone from Tokyo is also curled up listening to this while their Growlithe snoozes at their feet. All right. Lights low, blankets up, plush is secured. Whether you're under a cozy blanket fort or curled up in a pokeball-shaped beanbag, let's drift away together. Because we're about to uncover stories, secrets, and strange facts from the Pokemon universe that even Professor Oak probably forgot to tell us. So, take a breath. Exhale. And let's begin. Hey again, sleepyheads. Let's ease into our very first fact of the night with a tale about the Pokemon that almost wasn't the one we all know and love today, Pikachu. Now, you might be clutching your favorite yellow plush right now, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow and steady. But can you imagine a world where Pikachu wasn't the face of Pokemon, where it was just some other little guy? Back in the early 1990s, before Pokemon became the multi-billion-dollar cultural phenomenon it is today, the creators were busy, crafting a new universe, a world full of strange creatures, mystical abilities, and, of course, that thrilling bond between trainers and their Pokemon. But the world of Pokemon almost had a very different face at its center, and believe it or not, Pikachu was not the first choice to be the mascot, not even close. Originally, Clefairy was lined up to be the star of the show. Yep, Clefairy, round, pink, adorable, and slightly awkward. She was even front and center in the earliest Pokemon manga, Pokemon Pocket Monsters, a comic series released before the anime. In that manga, Clefairy was Ash's partner, not Pikachu. She was bold, brash, and funny, too. Way more chaotic than the soft-spoken Clefairy we're used to seeing. The writers really gave her a wild personality, likely in hopes of making her lovable in a very offbeat kind of way. But when it came time to adapt Pokemon into an anime, the producers started to question that decision. The team at Game Freak and the anime studio had long debates about who should carry the brand. It wasn't just about cuteness. It was about universal appeal. And Clefairy, despite her charm, just didn't seem to spark that extra something. She was pink, yes, and sweet-looking, but not particularly dynamic. She didn't really pop. And then there was Pikachu. Back then, Pikachu wasn't quite the icon we know today. He was still a relatively obscure electric type with chubby cheeks and stubby little arms. But he had something Clefairy didn't. Energy. Literally and figuratively. There was a brightness to Pikachu. His color, his electricity, his expressions. There was something inherently animated about him. He was cute, sure, but he also looked like he could run, leap, spark, zap, and bounce. All the things that make an animated character come alive. In fact, his early design was a little rounder than the Pikachu we know now. Chubbier, with tiny paws and a roly-poly belly, almost like a little electric pudding with ears. But even that version had charisma. You looked at him and just felt like he was about to wiggle into your heart. Behind the scenes, Ken Sugimori, the main illustrator for the first Pokemon games, played a big role in shaping Pikachu's final look. But the real origin of Pikachu's design came from Atsuko Nishida, a character designer at Game Freak. She's the one who originally drew Pikachu based on, you guessed it, a squirrel, not a mouse like the Pokédex says. A squirrel. She wanted something small, cuddly, and quick. Something that could climb, scurry, and have a tail that zapped like a bolt of lightning. If you look at Pikachu's zigzag tail, that squirrel inspiration becomes pretty obvious. But here's something even more adorable. Nishida added those red cheeks, not for any electrical reason, but because she thought they made Pikachu look friendlier. At the time, there wasn't even an expectation that Pikachu would be anything more than one of the 151 creatures in the game. Just another fun companion, a wide field of choices. But that little spark of charm, combined with a lucky twist of timing, was enough to change everything. When the anime team looked at the options for Ash's partner, Pokemon, they wanted someone who felt universal. Someone who could connect with children around the world, no matter what language they spoke. Pikachu's design had a perfect balance. It was neither overly masculine nor feminine, and its yellow color stood out. In fact, yellow is one of the most visible colors to the human eye, and it wasn't commonly used in character designs at the time. Most animated characters were red, blue, or green. Pikachu, glowing like a lightning bolt, stood out immediately. But there was one more challenge. Pikachu had to move. It had to emote, and Pikachu's body was ideal for that. Its ears could tilt and twitch. Its tail could flick and spark. Its cheeks could glow when it got excited, or angry, or scared. It was, in many ways, the perfect canvas for emotional storytelling. And then came the voice, Ikue Otani, the voice actress who gave Pikachu its now iconic Pika Pika and Pikachu, brought something magical to their character. Her performance was full of emotion despite using a tiny handful of syllables. She made Pikachu sound curious, cautious, brave, sleepy, excited, all without saying a single real word. It's hard to overstate how much her work contributed to Pikachu's success. Suddenly, the pieces fit together. Pikachu wasn't just a side character anymore. He was fast becoming the heart of the show. And sure enough, once the anime aired in 1997, Pikachu became a breakout star. Children instantly connected with the little electric mouse. They mimicked his voice, carried plush toys, and begged their parents for Pikachu merchandise. And slowly but surely, Clefairy faded into the background. In fact, Pikachu's popularity was so powerful that the games adapted in kind. Originally, the red and green versions in Japan, and later red and blue internationally, were followed by Pokémon Yellow, a version made specifically to highlight Pikachu as your starter. It followed Ash's journey more closely, and in that game, your Pikachu would follow you around outside its Pokeball, just like in the anime. It was a direct result of Pikachu's rise to fame, and from there, well, the rest is sleepyhead history. Now, Pikachu's face is on everything, from cereal boxes to airplanes, from Olympic mascots to parade balloons. Pikachu represents not just a franchise, but a feeling, a spark of nostalgia, comfort, and joy. But it's kind of wild, isn't it? To think that the most famous Pokémon of all time almost wasn't the mascot at all. That this whole world could have looked very different, if not for a few artists, a flash of yellow, and a cheerful squeak of Pika. And just like that, one little electric rodent changed the world. Lavender Town. Just hearing the name might bring back that familiar twinge of eerie nostalgia. A pale purple hue hangs in the back of your memory, like fog creeping in during an early morning dream. Nestled between roots in the original red and blue games, Lavender Town has always been more than just another stop on your Pokémon journey. It's a place that feels different, slower, quieter, a little colder, even when you know it's all pixels and beeps. But what made Lavender Town truly iconic, truly unforgettable, wasn't just its tower of ghostly encounters, or the somber story of Cubone and Marowak. No, what truly made it legendary was the music. Ah, that music. The moment you entered Lavender Town, the upbeat travel tunes of other towns fell silent, replaced by something that felt off. The melody was haunting, minimal, and dissonant. It was unlike any other track in the game. A simple few notes that carried a weird emotional weight, sadness, discomfort, curiosity, and for some, even fear. Over the years, this strange track sparked rumors, myths, whole urban legends. And somewhere along the line, Lavender Town became the subject of one of the internet's most enduring gaming mysteries, the myth of the Lavender Town syndrome. Let's go back, way back, to the late 1990s and early 2000s when the internet was young, forums were chaotic, and creepypastas were just beginning to bloom like ghostly flowers on message boards. The legend goes that shortly after Pokémon Red and Green were released in Japan in 1996, a series of unusual reports emerged. Kids were allegedly experiencing severe headaches, nausea, and even worse, after reaching Lavender Town. The blame? the high-pitched tones and binaural frequencies in the original version of the music. Supposedly, the composition triggered something deep within the minds of younger players, particularly those wearing headphones, and caused real-world psychological effects. Of course, none of this has ever been proven. There are no credible medical reports, no news articles, and no official statements from Nintendo, but the myth persisted. People swore by it. Some said the original music was changed for the international release. Others claimed there were differences in the game files, frequencies that were later removed. There were even spooky little games online that played the original Lavender Town track and challenged you to listen all the way through. As you might expect, these files often came with dire warnings, headaches, nightmares, or worse. Even though most of it was fiction, cleverly crafted by internet storytellers, something about the legend stuck. What's fascinating is how the story wove itself into the fabric of Pokémon's identity. The franchise that's known for friendship, battles, and collecting adorable creatures also has this strange, haunted chapter, one where a single piece of music could supposedly cause harm. And even though the so-called Lavender Town syndrome is almost certainly made up, it touched on something very real: how powerful music can be, especially when it's unexpected. In a game full of cheerful chiptunes, Lavender Town's theme hits you like a chill down the spine. It's discordant, layered with ghostly undertones, and completely unlike anything else in the game's soundscape. Here's where it gets interesting. There really were subtle differences between versions. The Japanese and international releases did contain changes, though not as dramatic as the myths claimed. According to sound designers and fan researchers, the early Lavender Town theme did have slightly different tonal balancing and higher frequencies, but nothing proven to be harmful, just different enough to be noticeable to players with sensitive ears. Still, that kernel of truth was enough to spark years of speculation. The ghost stories didn't stop at just music. People began digging into the game's code, searching for clues. Some claimed there were hidden sprites or glitched-out Pokémon that appeared only in Lavender Town under mysterious conditions. Others spun tales of a spectral figure who could appear behind you during the tower sequences, visible only for a single frame. A few said if you used specific combination of items and stood in just the right spot at midnight, whatever midnight meant on a Game Boy, you'd trigger a hidden event involving a ghost Pokémon that had never been officially released. None of these were true, of course, but that's the magic of urban legends. They thrive in the unknown. They live in the what-if. And really, what better place for such stories than Lavender Town? The in-game location is steeped in sorrow. Unlike every other town, which is defined by gyms, shops, or natural beauty, Lavender Town is defined by grief. It's a town where Pokémon are mourned, where trainers reflect on loss. It's quiet, solemn. The Pokémon Tower isn't a battle arena. It's a mausoleum. Players encounter ghosts, literal and metaphorical. And for a brief moment, the bright world of Pokémon becomes something softer, sadder, and a bit more mature. The music reinforced that. With its looping, chilling melody, it reminded you that even in this colorful, fantastical world, there's room for emotion, for memory, for stories untold. Maybe that's why the Lavender Town legend stuck. Not because people genuinely believed the song could harm them, but because everyone felt that strange, quiet power. It was unsettling, yes, but also beautiful. And in the end, that contrast, the balance between cute creatures and ghostly mysteries, became part of what made Pokémon special. In recent years, Game Freak and Nintendo have leaned into Lavender Town's legacy. The track has been remixed for games like Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and even subtly referenced in anime episodes and manga chapters. Fans embrace it now. It's become a Halloween tradition in the Pokémon community, returning to the tower, playing the song, and sharing spooky stories. What was once whispered on forums has become a cultural landmark, a part of the franchise's rich tapestry. And maybe, just maybe, that's how legends are supposed to work. They start as shadows, lurking at the edge of something familiar. They whisper instead of shout. They invite you in, asking questions without answers. Was there really anything dangerous in Lavender Town's music? Probably not. But did it make you feel something? Did it linger in your mind long after the screen faded to black? That's the real power. So next time you hear those soft, eerie notes drifting through your headphones, don't be afraid. Instead, let it be a gentle reminder that even in the quietest places, even in the strange pixelated corners of an old Game Boy cartridge, there's room for mystery. There's room for stories. And there's always room to dream. Now close your eyes and drift a little deeper. Lavender Town is far behind us now, but its song still plays softly somewhere in the distance. Once upon a simpler time, long before social media guides and step-by-step YouTube tutorials, Pokémon rumors traveled the old-fashioned way, through whispers on the playground, scribbled notes in school binders, and long, dramatic phone calls with friends, who swore they heard it from their cousin's neighbor's older brother. And out of all those magical rumors, some believable, some absolutely wild, there was one that stood out above the rest. A myth so enduring, so captivating, that even decades later it still lingers in the minds of Pokémon fans everywhere. Yes, we're talking about Mew and a truck. The legend was simple enough. Somewhere in Pokémon Red and Blue, hidden behind the SS Anne, lay a small, unassuming truck. Most players didn't even know it existed. In fact, if you followed the game's natural path and boarded the ship as expected, you'd trigger the event that made the vessel sail away, removing your only chance to return to that area. But if you somehow found a way to skip getting the HM for cut and delayed boarding the ship, you could wander around the dock, explore behind the ship, and discover the truck. Now, a truck in itself doesn't sound very exciting, but this was the Pokémon world, where very few vehicles existed, and certainly none parked mysteriously behind boats. This lone truck, sitting idle and unreachable by normal means, seemed so out of place, so deliberate. It just had to mean something. And what was the ultimate reward, according to legend? Mew, the mythical Pokémon. The original Hash 151, a creature so rare and mysterious that it wasn't even listed in the Pokédex. At least not until you saw it with your own eyes. The rumor claimed that if you could reach the truck and perform a precise sequence of actions, maybe using strength to move it, or perhaps interacting with it, from a specific angle, Mew would appear. Some versions said you needed to beat the Elite Four first. Others insisted it had to be done at night or while holding a certain Pokémon in your party. The story evolved with time, growing more elaborate, more cryptic, and somehow more believable. But here's the thing. Mew was real. Not the truck part, but the Pokémon itself. Game Freak had coded Mew into the original games, hidden away in the data, inaccessible by normal gameplay. Developers originally didn't intend for Mew to be caught or seen at all. It was added late in development by programmer Shigeki Morimoto as a kind of secret placeholder. The character data occupied just a few spare bytes of memory at the end of the game's code, tucked in quietly after the debugging tools were removed. It wasn't even supposed to be known, but secrets have a way of escaping. A few lucky players stumbled upon it through glitches, and once word got out that Mew actually existed, truly, verifiably existed, it gave sudden, thrilling credibility to all the other rumors, no matter how unlikely they sounded. And so, the truck myth grew legs. Even game magazines started to entertain the tale. In a pre-internet world, publications like Nintendo Power, GamePro, and EGM often printed tips and tricks based on player submissions, some of which were nothing more than speculation or fantasy. One issue teased a method to get Mew involving the truck and a series of convoluted steps. It wasn't confirmed, but it wasn't denied either. That soft ambiguity gave it power. It let imaginations run wild. Players tried everything. They used game sharks to warp their way behind the SS Anne. They traded Pokémon back and forth, trying to trigger the event. They walked every tile around the truck, clicking, testing, hoping. Some even spread detailed guides online in the early days of message boards and GeoCities websites, guides that claimed absolute success, complete with blurry screenshots of Mew next to the truck. Looking back, many of those images were clearly fake, but at the time, they were gospel, What made this rumor so irresistible wasn't just the possibility of finding Mew. It was the idea that the game still held secrets. That somewhere out there, beyond the bounds of the known map, was a magical discovery just waiting to be made. And in a game as deeply personal and imaginative as Pokémon, that hope was enough. The myth turned into a kind of digital folklore. Kids passed it down like campfire stories. Even players who knew logically that it wasn't true couldn't resist checking just once. And let's be honest, who among us didn't try it? Even if only in secret. Even if only once. Interestingly, years later, when the remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green were released, Game Freak acknowledged the legend in their own sly way. They left the truck there, behind the SS Anne, just sitting, still unreachable by normal play, still doing nothing, still fueling whispers. But this time, fans knew better. The mystery was now part of the fun. It's easy to forget how important Mew was to the Pokémon phenomenon. In a time before widespread internet access, the idea of a 151st Pokémon, one not listed in the manual, not seen in the commercials, not catchable in the wild, was electrifying. It made the world feel deeper, more alive. And the fact that Game Freak had actually hidden Mew in the game's code, even if the truck connection wasn't real, made everything feel possible. The Mew under the truck story isn't just a relic of the past. It's a symbol of an era, a time when we explored every pixel of a game. World because we believed there was more to discover. A time when our imaginations filled in the blanks, and rumors felt like quests. A time when curiosity was enough. In the years since, Pokémon has continued to inspire myths and mysteries. From secret evolutions to shiny hunting techniques to haunted cartridges and glitched dimensions, the spirit of exploration remains. But nothing has quite matched the staying power of that one old truck and the dream of the Mew beneath it. So if you ever find yourself playing the originals again and happen to visit the docks near the SS Anne, maybe take a detour, sneak behind the ticket booth, surf across the water, and just stand there in front of that little truck. It won't do anything. You won't find Mew. But for a moment, you might feel something magical, like being 10 years old again, like believing the world still holds secrets. And who knows, maybe it does. When we think about the early days of Pokémon, those pixelated adventures in Pallet Town, the thrill of choosing our first starter, and the slow chiptune music of the original Game Boy, we tend to remember the familiar things, the iconic creatures, the gym, battles, the journey to become a Pokémon master. But hiding just beneath the surface of Pokémon Red and Blue was something different, something not quite part of the Pokédex, a ghost in the machine, a creature never meant to be seen. And it had a name. That sounded more like an error message than a monster. Missing No. Missing No, short for missing number, wasn't part of the original 151 Pokémon, at least not officially. It was never meant to be, encountered by players, never designed to be part of the in-game ecosystem. But it was there, in the code, like a smudge on an old photograph. And the moment someone stumbled across it, completely by accident, of course, a new kind of legend was born. One that didn't come from Pokeballs or Professor Oak's lab. One that came from the forgotten corners of programming and digital curiosity. To understand the Missing No, we have to go back to the late 1990s when Pokémon Red and Blue were being developed by Game Freak for the Game Boy. The team behind the games was small, and they were pushing the limits of what that little handheld console could do. Every line of code had to be efficient. Every byte of memory had to be carefully accounted for. And as a result, the Pokémon data was arranged in a very particular way. There were spaces set aside for all 151 Pokémon, along with a few more just in case. You see, in early development, the team had considered having as many as 190 Pokémon. That's right, 190. Which means almost 40 were cut before the games even launched. These weren't just ideas in someone's notebook. Some had working designs, names, and even stats. But for one reason or another, They didn't make the final cut, yet their data wasn't entirely erased. Instead, it lingered, incomplete and unfinished, hidden in the depths of the cartridge's memory. And that's where Missing No lives. It's not just one thing. It's a kind of stand-in, a placeholder, an error handler. If the game tries to access a Pokémon that doesn't exist, it might call up Missing No. Instead, think of it like trying to tune an old radio between stations and catching a signal you weren't meant to hear, the static between the songs, the whisper behind the music. The most famous method for encountering Missing No involved talking to the old man in Viridian City who teaches you how to catch Pokémon. After watching his demonstration, if you then flew to Cinnabar Island and surfed along a very specific coastline, the game would start pulling wild Pokémon data from unusual parts of memory, including sometimes the slot where Missing No resides, what made Missing No so fascinating was that it wasn't just a visual glitch. It could actually affect your game. Encountering it could duplicate your sixth item, usually a master ball or rare candy. Suddenly, players discovered they could max out their teams, evolve Pokémon instantly, or capture anything with ease. It felt like cheating, but it also felt like a secret, like a magical loophole in the otherwise structured world of Pokémon. And the glitch itself? A strange, jagged figure that looked like static TV pixels stacked vertically. It didn't look like a Pokémon. It didn't even look like a sprite. It looked like something that wasn't supposed to be visible. And yet, there it was. Harmless for the most part, but sometimes corrupting Hall of Fame entries or freezing games. It was unpredictable, unstable, and that only added to its allure. As more players discovered Missing No, rumors began to swirl. Could you evolve it? Was it secretly Mew in disguise? Did catching it unlock hidden features? Some claimed their game turned entirely dark after catching one. Others believed Missing No was actually a deliberate test left by developers, like a hidden signature or calling card. The truth, however, is probably more mundane. It was a side effect of ambitious development and tight hardware limitations, a gap in the data that had to be accounted for. But Missing No wasn't alone. Within the game's code were other unused or scrapped Pokémon that shared similar digital fates. Some of these are now affectionately called prototype Pokémon, early versions of creatures that never quite became official. One was called Gorochu, a planned evolution of Raichu with horns and fangs. It was removed to simplify the evolution line, but its name lived on in fan lore. Others had placeholder names like Pokémon X, or were simple recolors of existing sprites. Perhaps the eeriest of all was the internal reference to a ghost Pokémon. In Lavender Town's Pokémon Tower, players encounter a ghostly figure that only becomes visible with the Sylph scope. But in the game's data, that ghost is actually a fully programmed sprite, one that resembles a cloaked, floating figure with blank eyes. Some believe it was originally intended to be a catchable Pokémon. Others think it was just a clever trick of narrative design. Either way, it added a layer of mystery to an already spooky part of the game. It's fascinating to think that so much of what made Pokémon feel real, its world building, its depth, its secrets, was sometimes the result of unfinished code or cut content. In most games, these things are scrubbed clean before release, but in Pokémon, they were simply left in, quiet, waiting, like forgotten memories. Years later, the discovery of official development materials would confirm the existence of many of these early concepts. Unused sprites, notes from designers. Even demo versions of the game shown at trade shows included creatures that never made it into the final Pokédex. These aren't just trivia. They're little pieces of what could have been. Alternate timelines, if you will. Versions of the Pokémon world that existed only in the minds of developers and the curious hearts of players. What's perhaps most comforting about all of this is how lovingly the community embraced these anomalies. Instead of rejecting them as bugs or errors, players treated them like folklore, like digital ghosts. The mythology of Missing No and the deleted Pokémon took on a life of its own. Fan art, fan fiction, even fan games were created around these characters that never were. And isn't that what Pokémon is all about? Discovery, curiosity, wonder. Whether you're catching your first Caterpie or decoding the mystery of a glitch, Pokémon hiding in the coastline of Cinnabar Island, there's always something new to uncover. Something strange. Something forgotten. In a way, missing, no, is the ultimate symbol of childhood exploration in a digital landscape. A reminder that behind every system and set of rules, there's always a little room for the unexpected. A little crack where the light and the legends get in. And even now, decades later, some players still surf along that same stretch of Cinnabar's coast, hoping to glimpse the flicker of that pixelated shadow. Just one more time, just to feel that wonder again. Because sometimes the best parts of the game aren't the ones planned on paper. They're the ones that sneak in through the cracks, the ones that feel like secrets, the ones that never got an official number, but were never really forgotten, not by the fans. And certainly not by those of us who still hear the faint whispers of the game's forgotten code, calling from beneath the screen. Let's take a soft little stroll back to the very beginnings of the Pokémon universe, a time before 1,000+ creatures, before Gigantamax, and shiny hunting, before EV training, and even before the anime said its first, "I choose you." Yes, we're going way back to the days of Pokémon Red and Pokémon Green, when things were simpler, a bit weirder, and, believe it or not, a little more zoological. Because, believe it or not, in those early days, the Pokémon world hadn't quite figured out that it was supposed to be exclusively full of, well, Pokémon. Back then, nestled between your Charmanders and Pidgeottos, there were some quiet little references to ordinary real-world animals like cats, dogs, birds, even cows. These weren't Pokémon with clever elemental types or evolutions. They were just animals, regular old Earth-style animals. The kind that don't breathe fire or shoot lightning or evolve into dragons. Which raises an oddly fascinating question. Were Pokémon originally meant to live alongside normal animals? And if so, where did those animals go? Let's begin with some classic Pokédex entries. The kind of thing we all read and probably never thought too hard about. Take the entry for early Pokémon like Icans, for instance. It describes Icans as a snake Pokémon, which is expected. But then it adds quite clearly that it swallows eggs of birds whole. Birds, not bird Pokémon, just birds. You know, the feathery worm-pecking kind. Then there's Meowth, described as being attracted to shiny coins like a cat. Excuse me, Meowth, you are a cat. Or are you? And then we have early entries for Pokémon like Sandshrew, which burrow underground like a shrew. At some point, you start to wonder if the writers weren't just describing Pokémon in terms of real-world animals, because that's all they had to work with. Or because those real-world animals were actually still part of the Pokémon world. Either way, it gets curiouser and curiouser. Even the anime wasn't shy about sprinkling in some non-Pokémon fauna. And if you watch the very first episodes of the original series, and we're talking old-school Kanto, Ash falls asleep on a rock level of old, you'll notice a few surprising appearances. Real-world, fish swimming in a pond, birds flying overhead that weren't Pidgey. And I kid you not, in the famous episode where Ash and friends cross a desert, there's a moment where real dogs, yes, actual dogs, can be spotted in the background. Not Growlithes, just dogs. Like the kind that might beg for scraps under a kitchen table. Makes you wonder if Officer Jenny ever needed help rescuing a lost Labrador instead of a Lillipup. Now, if this all sounds like a glitch in the Matrix, you're not alone. Over the years, fans began to notice and question these appearances. It seemed like at first the world of Pokémon was more of a shared environment where Pokémon coexisted alongside Earth-style critters, at least until the lore figured itself out. You might think of it like Pokémon's awkward teenage phase, when it still had one foot in the real world and the other in a universe of elemental mouse battles and evolving rock snakes. Game Freak, the studio behind Pokémon, wasn't immune to this. In fact, early concept art and design sketches, some of which were eventually published in official guidebooks, include drawings where Pokémon are directly compared to animals we'd recognize from biology textbooks. There's even an early, adorable sketch of what would become Vulpix, drawn right beside a real-world fox for inspiration. Artists were clearly borrowing traits from nature, blending real-world anatomy with fantastical abilities. You can almost imagine the conversation. What if a rat, but electric? Boom. Pikachu. What's fascinating is how quickly the franchise started phasing out these real-world comparisons. By the time Pokémon Gold and Silver arrived, the references to everyday animals were far less common. Pokédex entries were now saying things like, it preys on smaller Pokémon instead of birds or mice. The anime also adjusted. Birds in the sky? Now always Pidgey. Fish in the pond? Definitely Goldeen or Magikarp. And those background dogs? Poof, gone. Replaced by loyal Houndours or sniffy Snubbles. It was as if the Pokémon world had quietly decided to become fully self-contained, erasing those early strange crossovers with Earth's own wildlife. So what happened? Did Pokémon officially decide that real-world animals never existed in their universe? Well, sort of. As the lore deepened, especially with the release of games like Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire and later entries, the world building became more thorough. The entire ecosystem was built around Pokémon biology. There were Pokémon that pollinated flowers, ones that helped farms grow, and even some that filled the roles of common pets. If you needed a cow, Miltank, a cat, Esper, Skitty, take your pick. A monkey? Oh boy, we've got like 8 of those. Some even come in fire-type flavor. Eventually, the Pokémon universe became a kind of mirror to ours, where every animal niche was filled by a Pokémon species instead. Need a bird to carry messages? Say hello to Pidot. Want a sheep? Here's Wooloo. There's even a Pokémon that's basically just a penguin with an ice cube for a head. And yet, there's still a part of the fandom that wonders what happened to the regular animals that once roamed Pallet Town in the background. Some fans have jokingly speculated that Pokémon simply replaced them, like in a sort of evolutionary takeover. Others imagine that maybe the early references were just translation oddities. After all, the original Japanese versions of the games and anime had slightly different wording, and localizers may have chosen to use familiar animal terms to make things clearer for Western audiences. It wouldn't be the first time the localization team took some creative liberties. Let's not forget the infamous jelly donut incident. Yes, we all saw Brock holding an obvious rice ball and heard him say he was munching on a jelly donut. The early 2000s were wild. Still, the traces remain. If you dig through old guidebooks, concept sketches, and original Japanese manuals, you'll find evidence of the real-world roots the franchise once leaned on. And honestly, there's something strangely comforting about that. It reminds us that Pokémon didn't arrive fully formed. It grew, it experimented, and sometimes it wore mismatched socks while figuring out its place in the world. Like a young trainer on their very first day, it stumbled a little, made some odd choices, and gradually found its stride. Even now, in newer games like Pokémon Legends, Arceus, you can see hints of the franchise returning to a more naturalistic feel. The environments are lush, the ecosystems feel more alive, and the Pokémon behave more like wild creatures than ever before. It's as if Game Freak is gently saying, hey, we remember the roots too. Only now, instead of comparing them to cats and dogs, we just let Pokémon be Pokémon. And perhaps that's the magic of it all. The early real animal mentions gave us a bridge, a way to connect with this strange new world. They made it just familiar enough for us to believe in it. And once we did, the Pokémon could take over. Mice that shoot, electricity, fish that shoot lasers, keys that float, trash bags that fight. And it all somehow makes sense. So the next time you read an old Pokédex or spot a very non-Pokémon-looking bird in the background of an early episode, smile a little. Those were the gentle growing pains of a world still being built. A time when Pokémon were still just neighbors to the real. Animals we all knew. They've come a long way since then. But deep down, I like to imagine there's still a sleepy little squirrel or a dozing puppy living somewhere off-screen in the tall grass, just trying to avoid being zapped by a level 12 Pikachu. Let's drift away now to a time when mysteries hung in the air like stardust, and Pokeballs weren't just high-tech capsules, but ancient relics tied to legends. You see, long before we casually tossed Ultra Balls at roaming legendaries, there existed one Pokeball, so strange, so puzzling. It managed to confuse both players and developers alike. Its name? The GS Ball, gold and silver. Or was it something more? Let's open the capsule, metaphorically, of course, and uncover the curious tale of the Pokeball from space. The GS Ball made its cryptic debut in the anime and the Pokémon Crystal game era. It shimmered with a golden hue and bore the initials GS, but there was no real explanation in the games for what it did. It was simply placed in the code, sitting quietly in the background, like an unsent love letter from the developers. You couldn't open it, you couldn't use it, and yet it took up precious inventory space like a cosmic paperweight. The mystery was enough to drive early players wild with speculation. What did GS stand for? Gold, silver, Giovanni's secret, giant Snorlax. Okay, maybe not that one, but honestly, it could have been. Now, the real meat of this Pokeball myth comes from how it was originally intended to serve a larger purpose. The GS Ball was supposed to lead to a unique in-game event involving the mythical Pokémon Celebi. In Pokémon Crystal, the Japanese version featured a special shrine deep within Ilex Forest, lush, ancient, and coated in soft, permanent twilight. If you managed to transfer the GS Ball into the game using a special accessory in Japan, the shrine would glow and Celebi would appear. You'd battle and catch it, of course, because this is still Pokémon, not a nature documentary. But in the international versions, the Celebi event was never officially implemented. Players had the GS Ball, sure, but it didn't work. It just sat there, taunting you with its golden gleam like a trophy you couldn't quite reach. And as time passed, the GS Ball's true story began to blur into folklore. It was never fully explained, only mentioned in scraps of developer interviews and side conversations. The English releases removed all context, leaving fans with questions and forums filled with theories, some more unhinged than others. In the anime, though, things went slightly differently. Ash receives the GS Ball from Professor Ivy on the Orange Islands. Remember her? She was the one who made Brock go mysteriously quiet for several episodes. The GS Ball then travels with Ash to Johto, where it eventually ends up with Kurt, the eccentric Pokeball craftsman from Azalea Town. He's the guy who makes Pokeballs from apricorns, proving once and for all that Pokeball production is an artisanal craft in some regions. Kurt inspects the GS Ball, mumbles something about it being unopenable, and, well, that's it. That's where the anime drops the thread entirely. Why? Because the anime writers had planned a special arc around Celebi and the GS Ball. It was supposed to culminate in a time travel storyline, with Ash meeting Celebi in a magical forest filled with glowing light and gentle winds. But somewhere along the way, the plot was abandoned. Possibly due to scheduling, possibly because of the release of the fourth Pokémon movie, which also featured Celebi and made the GS Ball plot feel redundant. So, rather than wrap it up, they did the next best thing. They just didn't. That silence left the GS Ball to become one of the most enigmatic relics in Pokémon history. Was it just a scrapped idea? Or was it more? Fans speculated everything, from it being connected to Arceus to it being an alien device from space. After all, Pokeballs are pretty advanced technology. And let's face it, if you didn't know anything about them and saw someone zap a 20-foot dragon into a baseball-sized sphere, you might reasonably assume extraterrestrial tech was involved. Let's also not forget that the design of the GS Ball, the gold shell with the silver trim, is unusually ornate. Not at all like your everyday Pokeball. It looks ceremonial, like something you'd place on a shrine or seal inside an ancient temple with a riddle no one can solve. That's part of what makes it so special. It didn't feel like a device. It felt like a relic. Interestingly, the idea of mystical Pokeballs isn't unique to the GS Ball. The lore of Pokémon includes mentions of ancient trainers who used primitive Pokeballs crafted from wood or stone, even before modern technology. And the Hisui region, introduced in Pokémon Legends, Arceus, brought this to life in beautiful detail. There, Pokeballs hiss with steam, and catching a Pokémon feels more like magic than science. You can almost imagine the GS Ball as one of those proto-Pokeballs, just from a different world. or a different time. Some players even theorized the GS ball had other Pokémon inside it, not Celebi, but something darker. Some said it could contain Mew, or a version of Arceus, or a shadow Pokémon locked away to prevent catastrophe. The lack of an official explanation made it fertile ground for fanfic writers and lore lovers alike. After all, when a story leaves a hole, people will fill it with dreams, with speculation, or with deeply detailed headcanons involving space-time rifts and parallel dimensions. The Pokémon community doesn't mess around when it comes to mystery. Then there's the funny angle, because for something so steeped in mystery, the GS Ball's journey has had some very mundane turns. For example, in the English versions of the game, the GS Ball was left in the code, completely inaccessible without hacking or glitches. It's like the developers meant to remove it, but forgot and left it in the drawer, like an unopened jar of pickles in the back of the fridge. It's both ominous and deeply relatable. Even more amusing, the GS Ball's mystique meant the players would often spend hours trying to activate it. There were endless rumors online. Stand next to the shrine and spin in a circle 50 times. Press A and B at the same time while listening to Jigglypuffs. Lullaby beat the Elite Four using only a Magikarp. You name it, someone tried it, because the GS Ball had to do something, right? Eventually, Nintendo and Game Freak offered official statements confirming that the GS Ball event was real, but only in the Japanese versions. And yes, Celebi was supposed to emerge from it. That revelation didn't stop the myth-making, though. If anything, it made the GS Ball even more legendary, because now it wasn't just a scrapped idea. It was a glimpse of a story that almost happened, and in some places, actually did. That kind of duality is the perfect recipe for Pokémon legends. To this day, you can still find fan art and theories about the GS Ball. Some fans hope it returns in future games, reimagined as part of a deeper plotline. Maybe in a future Legends game, or a DLC where time travel meets ancient ball technology. Others think it should stay a mystery, like a bedtime story told half-finished. There's something oddly comforting about an unsolved puzzle, especially in a world like Pokémon, where answers are usually found in battle stats and evolution chains. The GS Ball stands out because it never got its final scene. It's the cliffhanger that never got resolved. Somehow that makes it perfect. So, here we are, years later, still talking about a single Pokeball that you couldn't open. And isn't that kind of beautiful? In a world of stats and strategy, of movesets and IVs, there's still room for magic, for mystery, and for the kind of questions that make you wonder, late at night. What's inside the GS Ball? Why was it created? And maybe, just maybe, if you dream the right way tonight, you'll find yourself in Ilex Forest, standing before that ancient shrine as the wind rustles the leaves. The light begins to glow, and something stirs within the ball. But for now, let that Pokeball rest. It's been waiting a long time, after all. Just like you. It deserves a quiet, peaceful night. Let's settle in now and drift into a world of soft pink blobs and powerful psychic legends. Tonight, we're exploring one of the most curious and enduring fan theories in all of Pokémon lore. The idea that Ditto, the lovable puddle of goo with the world's most unimpressed facial expression, might just be a failed clone of the mythical Pokémon Mew. Yes, really. At first glance, Ditto doesn't scream genetic experiment. He, or rather it, is small, squishy, and about as threatening as a slightly damp marshmallow. But underneath that gelatinous surface lies a mystery that fans have been unraveling for decades. A mystery rooted in science labs, old Pokédex entries, and one rather convenient shade of bubblegum pink. Let's start with the basics. Mew is one of the rarest Pokémon in the entire franchise, first introduced in the original Red and Blue games. It's said to contain the DNA of every known Pokémon, which is why it can learn virtually any move. That makes Mew not only powerful, but also incredibly versatile, a sort of ultimate genetic blueprint, the kind of Pokémon that scientists in the Pokémon world might, want to clone. Which brings us to Ditto. Ditto is best known for one thing and one thing only: transformation. Its lone move, Transform, allows it to copy any Pokémon it sees. Appearance, stats, even moves. It becomes an imperfect mirror of whatever it's facing, right down to the tiniest detail. Sound familiar? It should. Mew, too, can learn transform. In fact, it's one of the very few Pokémon that naturally knows the move. Now, here's where things get fun. Ditto and Mew share more than just a fondness for mimicry. They have the exact same base color. In the original games, both are represented as the same soft pink hue. Sure, you could chalk that up to a design coincidence, but it's one of many small similarities that fans noticed early on. They also weigh the same. Mew's weight in the Pokédex is listed as 8.8 pounds. Ditto, also 8.8 pounds. What are the odds? You start to wonder if Ditto is more than a walking smiley face made of pudding. There's also their base stats to consider. Mew's stats are all perfectly balanced, 100 across the board. Ditto's are less impressive, but also even 35 in every category. It's like Mew's stats, but watered down, reduced, diluted even. Some might say, failed. And that leads us to the fan theory that's been circulating since the late 1990s, that Ditto is the result of failed experiments to clone Mew. Before the scientists in Cinnabar Island succeeded in creating Mewtwo, a massive psychic powerhouse with attitude, issues, they had to try a few times, right? What if Ditto is one of those early attempts? A clone that didn't quite make the cut. The theory gained even more traction when players began noticing Ditto's spawn locations. In the original Red and Blue games, Ditto is most commonly found in the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island. That's the same mansion where Mewtwo was created. The building is in ruins, full of journal entries describing the birth of Mewtwo, and scattered with failed experiments and fire hazards. It's the perfect place to stumble across a gooey lab mistake hiding behind a pile of rubble. There's also the daycare factor. Ditto can breed with almost any Pokémon. It's the universal donor of the Pokémon world. Put Ditto in the daycare with anything that has a heartbeat, or even doesn't, looking at you, Magnemite, and boom, you get an egg. It doesn't even matter if the Pokémon is a genderless golem or a floating psychic jellyfish. Ditto gets the job done. That makes sense, though, if Ditto shares genetic traits with Mew, who, as we know, contains the DNA of all Pokémon. Maybe Ditto, even in its failed clone state, retained just enough genetic flexibility to make it the ideal breeding partner. Romantic? Not really. Useful. Incredibly. Let's not forget about Ditto's face. That blank, sleepy smile and tiny dot eyes. Adorable, yes. But have you ever looked at a Ditto that's transformed into something else? Its face doesn't change. Even when it becomes Charizard or Gyarados or a literal deity, it still has that vacant Ditto grin. Like it's saying, yes, I am Arceus, destroyer of worlds, and I am also a jelly bean. Now think about Mew. It doesn't have that same expression, of course, but its playful demeanor, its bouncing, floating, smiling way of being feels emotionally adjacent to Ditto. It's not proof, but it's a vibe that hints at a shared origin, even if one took the glamorous path and the other, well, stayed a goo. Some fans take it even further. They've pointed out that in Pokémon Yellow, a game that mirrored the anime closely, Mew is completely unobtainable without special events. But Ditto is right there, mimicking its genetic forebear like a backup dancer left on stage after the star performer vanished. Even the anime occasionally toys with this theory. In various episodes, Ditto is shown to be both useful and a little unstable. Some Dittos can't transform properly. Others get the shape right, but leave their little Ditto faces on everything. Again, this adds to the idea that Ditto's transformation ability is imperfect, not broken, just incomplete. And doesn't that feel like a hallmark of a clone that didn't turn out quite right? Of course, the theory has its critics. Some argue that Ditto predates Mew in development, which is true to an extent. Ditto was always intended as a novelty Pokémon, something that could copy anything for a quick laugh in battle. Others say the similarities are coincidental, a result of limited hardware and sprite palettes during the Game Boy era. After all, there were only so many shades of pink to go around. Still, when you stack up the details, The matching weight, color, moveset, and habitat, plus the whole universal breeding partner thing. It starts to feel like more than coincidence. Maybe the developers didn't set out to link Ditto and Mew, but over time, fans connected the dots. Or rather, the blobby, smiling face dots. There's even a poetic symmetry to it. Mew, the elegant origin of all Pokémon DNA, and Ditto, the imperfect echo. One became a legend. The other became, well, a very handy daycare tool. It's like Pokemon's version of Frankenstein's monster, if Frankenstein's monster could turn into a Blastoise and was extremely squishy. And yet, that's part of Ditto's charm. For all its goofy flexibility, Ditto has become beloved, not just for its battle utility or its breeding prowess, but because it's a mystery that fans have never stopped wondering about. It's the kind of mystery that makes the Pokémon world feel deeper, like a place where science and legends walk hand in hand, or wobble hand in goo. Modern games have even leaned into the theory in subtle ways. For example, in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, Ditto can be found in Cerulean Cave, the same post-game dungeon where Mewtwo resides. Is it a coincidence? Or another quiet nod to the theory? And what about Pokémon Go? In that game, Ditto disguises itself as other Pokémon and reveals itself only after being caught. It's almost like it's hiding, unsure of its place in the world, maybe even unsure of who it really is. That's where the theory becomes strangely poignant. Ditto, the clone that never quite made it, always copying, never original, always adapting but never whole. There's a certain quiet sadness in that, isn't there? And maybe a little hope, too, because even if Ditto was a failed experiment, it still found a place in the world. It still gets invited to battles, helps fill Pokédexes, and even stars in plush toy lines with unsettlingly human-like eyes. In its own weird way, Ditto made it. Not as a legendary, but as a legend in its own right. So, as you drift off tonight, picture Ditto not just as a little blob of pink goo, but as a creature with a mysterious past and a surprising legacy. Whether it was born from a lab accident or simply dreamed into being by a tired developer, Ditto has managed to capture hearts and spark theories for decades. And who knows, maybe someday in some distant future game or region, we'll finally get the truth. There's something wonderfully comforting about the Pokémon anime. No matter how much time passes in our world, you can turn it on and still find Ash Ketchum running into the forest without a map, tripping over a wild weedle, and yelling Pikachu's name like it's the only word he knows. He's forever 10 years old, always eager, always losing hats and making friends. But have you ever wondered why? Why didn't Ash grow up? The Pokémon anime first aired in 1997. If time moved normally in the series, Ash would be in his mid-30s by now, possibly, working a desk job at the Pallet Town post office while Pikachu zaps the coffee machine to life every morning. But no, Ash is still 10. He's always been 10. And apparently he always will be. It's a mystery that's fascinated fans for decades. A quiet, unchanging thread in a world full of evolving creatures. But tonight, we're going to gently unravel that thread. Let's cozy up and float through the fascinating reasons why Ash Ketchum never aged, and how the creators of the anime pulled it off without the world noticing. Too much. To begin, we have to look at the very first episode of the series. Ash wakes up late on the day he's supposed to receive his first Pokémon. He scrambles out the door, no breakfast, no plan, and ends up with the only partner left, Pikachu, a stubborn electric, mouse with attitude and no chill. Together, they begin a journey that spans continents, legends, and approximately 500 dramatic team rocket balloon explosions. From that moment, the adventure kicks off with one solid, clearly stated fact. Ash is 10 years old. That number is never changed, no matter how many leagues he enters, how many regions he visits, or how many existential Pokémon he meets in mysterious dimensions. He's 10 in the Indigo League, 10 in Johto, 10 in Sinnoh, 10 even when battling deities with glowing eyes on floating islands. Now, at first, fans thought this might just be a continuity oversight, a side effect of an episodic cartoon that doesn't pay attention to timelines. But over time, it became clear. This was intentional. A choice. A quiet rule set by the anime's creators to keep Ash young. Forever. Why? Well, in short, relatability. Ash is meant to be the viewer's avatar. For generations of kids just getting into Pokémon, he's the friendly face that says, hey, you can do this too. He's the eternal beginner, a constant first-timer, a wide-eyed, reckless, hopeful trainer who makes all the same. Mistakes you probably did your first time playing red or blue. And it's a lot harder to relate to someone if he suddenly turns 26 and starts paying taxes. In interviews over the years, the producers of the anime have danced around the topic of Ash's age with gentle vagueness. They say, time doesn't flow normally in the Pokémon world. That 1 year doesn't necessarily equal 1 Earth year, which is both poetic and extremely convenient. But let's look deeper. The Pokémon anime lives in a narrative loop, a beautiful animated Groundhog Day with gym badges. Ash travels to a new region, meets new friends, competes in a league, has his heart broken by defeat or victory, and moves on. Each season begins with a soft reset, new clothes, new hat, same age. You'll notice that the moment any character development starts to feel too permanent, the story gently resets itself. His traveling, companions rotate like polite dinner guests. Brock leaves. Misty returns. May waves goodbye. Serena blushes and disappears like a dream you barely remember. The writers sprinkle in just enough emotion to tug your heartstrings. And then, poof, Ash is back on a boat to the next region with the same eternal enthusiasm and zero packing skills. One of the clever ways the show maintains this illusion of timelessness is through its flexible use of memory. Ash rarely mentions past adventures unless the plot demanded. You'll never hear him say, "This reminds me of that time I fought Articuno in the battle, Frontier." No, he approaches every situation like it's brand new, even if he's seen 12 identical forests and at least 15 nearly. Identical nurse joys. But it's not just about selective memory. The world around Ash also refuses to age. Professor Oak still looks exactly like he did in 1997. His mom, Delia Ketchum, has been a young single parent for nearly 30 years now. If she's aging, she's doing it in reverse. Maybe she's secretly a time-type trainer. Even Team Rocket, Jesse, James, and Meow, never seem to grow or change beyond new hairstyles and outfit tweaks. They've been blasting off again for over 2 decades and still haven't learned to keep their feet on the ground. Honestly, it's kind of admirable. There's also a brilliant storytelling strategy at play here. By keeping Ash young, the creators are free to revisit old ideas with a fresh coat of paint. Want to reintroduce the first generation of Pokémon to a new audience? Just drop Ash in Kanto again. He won't remember the map, and neither will the new viewers. Want to explore Mega Evolutions or Dynamax battles without confusing a younger audience? Easy. Ash is still 10 and still figuring things out, just like you. Now, some fans have tried to rationalize the timeline in more scientific ways. There's a popular theory that Ash fell into a coma during the first episode when Pikachu shocked him and the flock of Spearow. According to this theory, everything that follows is a dream, or a kind of purgatory, where time doesn't exist, and Ash's subconscious creates endless adventures as a way to cope. It's spooky. It's weird. And while it has a certain eerie charm, it's probably not canon. But you have to admit, it does explain why Ash has met multiple gods, traveled through dimensions, and befriended time dragons, all before hitting puberty. Other fans have suggested that perhaps time does move forward in the Pokémon world, but incredibly slowly. Like 1 calendar year in our world equals about 2 months in Ash's. That would make him still maybe 11. So maybe he's aging, just at the pace of a particularly relaxed slowpoke. But here's another way to look at it, one that's far more comforting. What if Ash doesn't age because the Pokémon world isn't meant to reflect our world's rules? What if it's a dreamlike place where excitement, wonder, and friendship stretch endlessly, unburdened by birthdays or wrinkles or the looming existential dread of adulthood? Ash is a symbol of youth, not just in age, but in spirit. His eternal 10ness represents the joy of discovery, the courage to try again. After failure, and the belief that tomorrow might bring a new friend, a new challenge, or a new badge. His childhood crystallized into a baseball cap and boundless energy. It's also worth noting that Ash did finally win a major Pokémon League in the Alola region. After 20 years of near misses, that victory was framed as a massive emotional moment, not just for Ash, but for fans who had grown up watching him try. Yet even in that triumphant moment, he was still 10. Still that same scrappy kid from Pallet Town with a dream too big for one lifetime. And maybe that's the point. Ash Ketchum doesn't need to age because he's not a person. He's an idea, a living, breathing embodiment of the Pokémon journey itself, an anchor in a world that keeps expanding. While new generations of players come and go, Ash remains wide-eyed, hopeful, and late for everything. And Pikachu, loyal as ever, stays right by his side, as if to say, it's okay, we've got time. Because in the Pokémon world, time is soft and stretchy. It bends like a lazy Snorlax, napping in the sun. There's no rush, no deadline. Just an open road, a new adventure, and the sense that no matter how many episodes pass, there will always be another. Sunrise waiting for Ash and Pikachu. So, as you drift off tonight, think of that eternal summer morning in Pallet Town. Of Ash throwing on his cap, grabbing a slice of toast, and dashing out the door with Pikachu close behind. He's 10, always 10. And somewhere out there, in a world lit by glowing poke, balls and infinite forests, he's just beginning his journey all over again and again, forever young, forever dreaming, forever chasing the next adventure.
Let's dim the lights just a little more, because we're heading into the darker corners of the Pokédex. You know, the part where things get just a bit unsettling, in a cozy kind of way. Because Pokémon might be known for adorable creatures and bright colors, but if you've ever read some of the in-game entries, you know they've got a spooky streak too. Tonight we'll be slowly drifting through some of the creepiest, strangest, and most oddly poetic Pokédex entries ever written. Nothing too scary, of course. Just enough to raise an eyebrow or two, and then gently drift off to sleep, wondering how a balloon could kidnap a child. Let's start with an old favorite, Drifloon. You might remember this one from the Sinnoh region. It's a tiny, ghostly balloon Pokémon with a little heart-shaped string. Cute, right? Until you read its Pokédex entry. According to Pokémon Pearl, Drifloon is said to steal children who mistake it for a balloon. That's right. This thing just floats around like it's part of a birthday party, and then when some poor kid grabs the string, whoosh, off they go. Now, whether Drifloon's really strong enough to carry a whole child is another question, but in the Pokémon world, logic and physics like to take naps sometimes. And speaking of unsettling, let's talk about Banette. Banette is a ghost-type Pokémon introduced in Generation 3, and it's basically an evil plush doll. According to Pokémon Emerald, Banette is a doll that became a Pokémon over its grudge from being thrown away. It says Banette generates energy by sticking pins into itself. So it's basically the Pokémon version of a voodoo doll, crossed with a bad breaker. If that isn't nightmare fuel wrapped in velvety ghost-type charm, I don't know what is. Now, not all the creepy Pokédex entries are from ghost types. Take Drowsy, for instance. You'd think a sleepy tapper-like psychic. Pokémon wouldn't be too creepy. But then you read this line from Pokémon Fire Red. If your nose becomes itchy while you are sleeping, it's a sure sign that one of these Pokémon is standing above your pillow and trying to eat your dream through your nostrils. Oh, great. Not only do we have to worry about bad dreams, now there's the possibility that Drowsy is snacking on them. Through your nose. That's some very specific and mildly alarming detail, Game Freak. And let's not forget Yamas. Now here's one that doesn't even try to be subtle. From Pokémon Black, each of them carries a mask that used to be its face when it was human. Sometimes they look at it and cry. Okay, hold on. So this Pokémon used to be a person. And now it's a ghost carrying its own former face around like a reminder of the good old days? That's straight up tragic. Sad ghost with identity issues. We've all been there. Of course, there's also Phantom. Cute little tree stump ghost, right? Just a shy, spooky guy with leaves sticking out of its head. Except Pokémon Sun tells us that it's spirit of a child who got lost in the forest. Well, there goes the cheerful woodland picnic. Imagine walking through the woods, hearing giggles, and realizing the friendly-looking tree sprite is a lost soul, still adorable. Just, haunted. Now let's revisit Hypno, another psychic type with major boundary issues. According to Pokémon Fire Red, it carries a pendulum-like device. There was once an incident in which it took away a child it hypnotized. That's all we get. No follow-up, no resolution. Just a very calm description of an alleged abduction. We're really racking up the child-snatching points in this Pokédex tonight, aren't we? But if you thought that was unsettling, let's head over to the Alola region for a bit and check out Mimikyu. Ah, yes, Mimikyu, the little ghost Pokémon dressed like Pikachu because it wants to be loved. Sounds sweet until you read this entry from Pokémon Sun. Its actual appearance is unknown. A scholar who saw what was under its rag was overwhelmed by terror and died of the shock. Nothing like wholesome death by cuteness. The idea of something so terrifying hiding behind a sheet is kind of poetic, really. Mimikyu just wants to be accepted. It just doesn't want to kill you in the process. That's character growth. And speaking of haunted cloth, how about Frostless? This chilly ghost/ice type from the Sinnoh region is equal parts graceful and chilling. According to Pokémon Sun, when it finds humans or Pokémon it likes, it freezes them and takes them to its chilly den, where they become decorations. Lovely, that's one way to redecorate. I guess that makes Frostless a collector of very still house guests. Bet her fridge is always full. Next up, let's revisit Gorgus. This is another ghost type with a festive edge. Basically a living Halloween pumpkin with a spooky hairdo. Sounds harmless enough. But Pokémon Y casually states that Gorgus sings joyfully as it observes the suffering of its prey. I'm sorry, joyfully? While watching suffering, that's less pumpkin party and more haunted opera. You do you, Gorgeous, but maybe tone down the evil musical number. Let's go deep with some more unusual entries now. Consider Gengar. Good old Gengar, mischievous, cheeky, and a staple in so many teams. But listen to this from Pokémon Silver. To steal the life of its target, it slips into the shadow of its prey and silently waits for an opportunity. Very ninja, very ominous. Imagine trying to fall asleep and realizing your own shadow might be plotting against you. Cozy. Or how about Shedinja? The Pokémon that appears when Nincada evolves under specific conditions. Shedinja is literally a hollow shell that floats and stares blankly. That's unsettling enough. But Pokémon Ruby adds, it is believed that this Pokémon will steal the spirit of anyone peering into its hollow body from its back. So it's a floating shell that punishes curiosity, basically the Pokémon equivalent of a haunted do not disturb sign. And then there's Dusclops. Now we're really getting into ghostly territory. According to Pokémon Sapphire, its body is hollow. It is said that it creates a black hole inside its body and sucks in everything. I'm sorry, what? A black hole inside a Pokémon? That's less a ghost type and more interdimensional threat. Imagine going to pet your cute Pokémon and getting vacuumed into oblivion. Not the most relaxing bedtime visual, but certainly memorable. But don't worry, it's not all child-snatching, dream-snacking, soul-stealing ghost types. Okay, actually it is. But they're ghost types, with flair. They're unsettling in that campfire story kind of way, just spooky enough to make you think, maybe I won't read the Pokédex after dark anymore. Still, the thing about these entries is that they give depth and character to creatures we might otherwise just think of as cute battle companions. They show that the Pokémon world, just like ours, has layers. Some funny, some sad, and some very, very strange. The Pokédex writers didn't just make a database. They created a ghost story anthology dressed up as a children's game. And, honestly, we love them for it. Let's end this spectral journey on one last note. Duskarl. A quiet little reaper with one glowing red eye. It seems shy, almost. Harmless. But Pokémon Ruby lets us know that Duskarl can pass through any wall, no matter how thick it may be. Once this Pokémon chooses a target, it will doggedly pursue the intended victim until the break of dawn. Relentless, silent, and committed. Duskarl is basically your ghost-type personal assistant, just not one you can fire.
So tonight, as you close your eyes and listen to the wind outside, maybe spare a little thought for the ghost Pokémon roaming the regions. The ones that just want to be loved, or feared, or used as home decor. Whether it's the balloon with boundary issues or the puppet with a grudge, they're all part of what makes the Pokémon world so weirdly wonderful. And as your eyes grow heavier, just remember, they're fictional, probably.
It's hard to imagine a world where Pokémon ends, not just takes a break or fades out of popularity for a while, but actually finishes. No more new regions, no more new Pokémon, no more Ash, Pikachu, or battles that suspiciously end in a tie. And yet, back in the early 2000s, that very scenario nearly became reality. There was a time, very early in the Johto era, when the people behind Pokémon considered wrapping the whole thing up, tying a neat little bow on the story and sending Ash off into the sunset, Pokeballs in hand, as credits rolled across a finished saga. It was going to be the end of a cultural phenomenon, and we almost didn't notice it coming. Let's drift gently back in time, to a point when Pokémon Red and Blue had already taken over the world. In Japan, Pocket Monsters was already a household name by 1998. Kids were catching, trading, and obsessing over these strange little monsters, whether on Game Boys, in card binders, or on Saturday morning TV. Then the anime was localized overseas, and things went nuclear. Pikachu became more recognizable than Mickey Mouse. Stores couldn't keep the games in stock, and suddenly something created by a small team of developers and animators had become one of the biggest franchises on the planet. But success can be exhausting, especially when no one expected things to get this big. When the anime was first written, it was never meant to go on forever. In fact, it was designed with a very clear arc. Ash would travel through the Kanto region, grow as a trainer, and eventually reach the Pokémon League. And that would be that. A tidy ending. A coming-of-age story about perseverance, friendship, and never giving up. Even when your Charizard refuses to listen to you for 40 episodes. Now, of course, that didn't happen. Because somewhere along the way, probably around the time Pikachu plush toys started selling by the boatload, the creators realized they had something far too big to just end. But that realization didn't come all at once. As the anime entered its second major arc, the Johto Journeys, the tone shifted in some subtle but very telling ways. For one, Ash started making noticeably less progress. Remember how in the original Kanto arc, each gym felt like a major accomplishment? Brock, Misty, Erika, Sabrina, all memorable milestones on his journey. In Johto, it was like someone had gently tapped the brakes. Filler episodes became more common. You'd tune in excited to see the next gym, and instead get an entire episode where Team Rocket opens a fake Pokémon daycare again. The pacing felt more relaxed, more episodic, and honestly more like the show wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. Which is kind of ironic because behind the scenes, it was in a rush to decide what the future even looked like. Here's the thing. The second generation of games, Gold and Silver, were originally conceived as the final Pokémon games. Yes, final, as in the last. Game Freak had packed them with everything they could. Not only did they include a whole new region, Johto, and a whole new set of Pokémon, but once you beat the game, you could return to Kanto. That's right, 2 entire regions in 1 cartridge. This wasn't just a cool bonus. It was designed as a farewell tour, a way of saying, here's everything you loved from the beginning, and something new to remember us by. You beat all the Johto gyms. You defeat the Elite Four. Then, as a final test of your skills, you climb Mount Silver and battle the silent, brooding trainer known only as Red, a mirror of your own journey, a showdown with the ghost of your past. If that doesn't scream series finale, I don't know what does. In the anime, something similar was planned. There were rumblings, quiet ones, but persistent, that Johto might be Ash's last stop, that the conclusion of the Johto League would be his final test, and that his story would wrap up there. There was even talk that Ash might finally beat the Pokémon League and pass the torch to a new protagonist. One rumor suggested that a new trainer would take over, traveling to Hoenn, while Ash would occasionally appear as a powerful mentor figure, like the cool uncle who shows up to give you a bicycle and vanishes again. But here's the twist. Fans didn't want that. At least, not all of them. Sure,
Ash wasn't winning a ton of battles. And yes, his Pikachu seemed to conveniently forget how to thunderbolt whenever a new region started. But Ash was familiar. He was the face of the franchise, and more importantly, Pikachu was the franchise. Removing Ash meant removing Pikachu, and removing Pikachu meant risking the entire brand identity. So the writers blinked. Instead of ending the story, they retooled it. Ash would continue, but perpetually stuck in a loop. He'd travel to a new region, meet new friends, catch a new set of Pokémon, and battle new gyms. But he'd never truly age. He'd never become a Pokémon master in the traditional sense. He'd just keep going, like a comforting dream you return to every night. And so, the series that was supposed to end didn't. It transformed from a coming-of-age tale to something more cyclical, a gentle reset with each generation, a familiar face in an ever-changing world. And you know what? There's something oddly comforting about that. Ash may never win every battle. He may never age. His Pikachu may mysteriously reset every region. But he's always there, waking up late, grabbing a piece of toast, running to Professor Oak's lab in his socks. And we, the viewers, get to come along for the ride. Again and again. So the next time you rewatch an old episode, or hear that familiar poke rap echoing through your brain at 2 a.m., just remember, it was never supposed to last this long. And yet, here we are, decades later, still curled up with stories about electric mice, fire-breathing dragons, and the boy who never gave up. And maybe, never growing up isn't such a bad thing after all. Let's settle in now, cozy and calm, and take a quiet journey through the strange, often whimsical and surprisingly clever world of Pokémon names. Because behind every Pikachu, Gengar, and Bulbasaur is a secret language, a little wink from the creators, and sometimes a pun so bad, it's actually genius. Let's begin where most names begin, in Generation 1. The original 151 Pokémon are where the magic started, and many of those names were born from careful blends of biology, mythology, and, well, good old dad jokes. Take Bulbasaur, for example, a mix of bulb, as in plant bulb, and saur from the Greek word for lizard or dinosaur. It's not just a cute, leafy frog. It's literally a bulb dinosaur. And you know what? That's kind of poetic. It tells you exactly what it is. A seedling on legs, ready to photosynthesize and tackle gym leaders. Its evolutions, Ivysaur and Venusaur, continue the trend. Ivy being a trailing plant, and Venusaur referencing Venus flytraps, plants, known for chomping things with surprising ferocity. So yes, by the time Bulbasaur reaches its final form, it's essentially a walking, roaring garden of doom. Now, let's consider Charmander. It's fiery, it's lizardy, and its name is a lovely combination of char, as in burnt, and salamander, a creature that's mythologically associated with fire, which is fun because real salamanders are actually kind of soggy little amphibians. But don't tell Charmander that. He's got pride. Charmeleon and Charizard continue the flame theme. Melion from Chameleon and Izzard, which may be a stretch of lizard or possibly a nod to fantasy dragons. Either way, Charizard sounds fierce, like a name that breathes fire even when whispered. Then there's Squirtle, an adorable blend of squirt and turtle. Simple, efficient, kind of goofy, and perfectly on brand. When it evolves, we get Wartortle, which adds war and a touch of edge, like it's trying out its rebellious teenager phase. And then Blastoise, a combination of blast and tortoise. Suddenly our squirt gun turtle is a full-on tank. One of the most iconic names is, of course, Pikachu. It sounds cute because it is cute. But did you know it's based on Japanese? Onomatopoeia. Pika is a sound for a spark, and chu is the sound of a mouse squeak in Japanese. Put it together, and Pikachu is, quite literally, a spark squeak, which frankly is just precious. Japanese names, by the way, often carry their own hidden meanings. Gyarados, for example, comes from Gyaku, meaning rebellion, and dosu, a threatening-sounding syllable often used in dramatic speech. In Japanese folklore, a koi fish can leap over a waterfall and become a dragon. That's exactly what Magikarp evolves into. A metaphor so satisfying it deserves a round of applause, or at least a respectful nod while wrapped in your blanket. Then there's Snorlax, who is very much what it sounds like, snoring, relaxing, and likely dreaming about his next snack. In Japanese, Snorlax is Cabigon, named after a member of the development team, known for falling asleep at his desk. That's right, Snorlax is literally based on a real-life nap enthusiast. That's some peak sleepy representation right there. Not all names are soft and sweet, though. Some have an edge. Gengar is a great example. Its name may come from doppelganger, a ghostly double which fits its spooky shadow aesthetic. Gengar is mischievous and creepy in the most huggable way possible. And then there's Haunter, which is delightfully blunt. He haunts. That's it. No need to overthink it. Simple ghost. Very effective. Let's talk about the Eevee family. Eevee itself doesn't mean anything specific, but its name sounds like the letters E and V, possibly a nod to evolution. And that's where it gets interesting. Each of its evolutions has a suffix that hints at its type. Vaporeon, for water, from vapor. Jolteon for electric, from jolt. Flareon for fire, from, you guessed it, flare. The naming pattern continues across future generations. Espeon from ESP, for psychic powers. Umbreon from Umbra, Latin for shadow. Glaceon for ice, from Glacia. And Leafeon, well, you can figure that one out. What makes these names so satisfying is how they teach players what type the Pokémon is without needing a Pokédex. It's subtle, game design genius, education through wordplay. Now, here's a fun one. Mr. Mime. His Japanese name is Barrier, which sounds like barrier because he creates invisible walls. But when localizing the game, the translators went with Mr. Mime to match his mime-like movements. However, this led to the very odd situation of a Pokémon with a gendered title. One that could still be female in-game. Which means, yes, there are female Mr. Mimes. And no, we haven't figured out what to call them. Miss Mime? Lady Barrier? The world may never know. Another fan favorite is Jigglypuff. It's got that soft, puffed-up sound to it. Jiggly makes it feel squishy and light, and Puff is like a gentle exhale. Its singing might put you to sleep, but its name is already halfway there. Then we have Wobbuffet, whose Japanese name is Sonos, a phrase meaning that's the way it is. In the anime, Wobbuffet's whole gimmick is that it pops up and says its name dramatically, Wobbuffet, which somehow works every time. It feels like that one friend who only chimes in to agree with you. No matter what you say, Wobbuffet is just back there nodding. Yes, yes, indeed. Some Pokémon names are just plain fun to say. Like Lickitung. It's kind of gross, kind of wonderful. It licks things. It has a tongue. That's the whole deal. Thanks for coming to its TED Talk. Mook, on the other hand, is a pile of sludge named, well, Mook. It's just sludge, but spelled worse. No notes, perfect. And Ekans? That's snake spelled backward. Likewise, Arbok is cobra, a play on cobra. These two are beloved for being so on the nose it loops around into brilliance. Rocket Team poetry. And then we have Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, the legendary birds. Each name ends in a number from Spanish. Uno, dos, tres. Articuno is icy and first. Zapdos is electric and second. Moltres is fiery and third. If you never noticed that before, don't worry, you're not alone. Many of us were just busy trying to catch them in poke balls that kept bouncing off. Over the generations, the naming schemes have grown more complex, and sometimes delightfully absurd. Pokémon like Vanillux, a literal ice cream cone Pokémon, or Trubbish the garbage bag, take things in a quirky direction. Their names don't hide what they are, but they do make you smile, or wince, or both. Aegislash, for example, is a sword and shield ghost. Its name mixes Aegis, meaning shield, and slash, for obvious reasons, and Dragapult, a dragon that launches little ghost missiles from its head, is a mashup of dragon and catapult. Somehow that makes sense. Let's not forget the regional forms. Alolan Exeggutor is a great one. The original Exeggutor was a squat, egg-like palm tree, but in Alola, it's a comically tall dragon tree. The name stayed the same, but the tone changed. Like when someone grows up and gets a neck 4 stories tall. Happens to the best of us. And then we have Pokémon names that borrow from mythology, like Yveltal, Xerneas, and Zygarde. which draw on Norse and Celtic roots. Their names feel ancient, mysterious, perfect for legendary beings that control life, death, and balance. What all of this shows us is how much care goes into naming each Pokémon. The names aren't just placeholders, they're microstories. Each one tells you a little bit about the creature's nature, abilities, or origin. Whether it's a ghostly mimic, a sparkly mouse, or a chunky turtle tank, the names are little poems. Some are silly, some are clever, and some are beautifully weird. But most of all, they're memorable. Even decades later, we remember them. Not just because we caught them, trained them, or watched them on Saturday mornings, but because the names stuck. They sang, they rhymed, they painted pictures in our minds, long after we'd put the Game Boy away. So next time you hear the word Psyduck, take a moment to appreciate that it's a duck with psychic headaches, or that gardevoir comes from guard, meaning guard, and devoir, meaning duty. A name with elegance and purpose, because behind every little creature in the Pokédex is a name. And behind every name is a tiny window into a world of ideas, jokes, references, and imagination. And really, what better bedtime story could there be than that? Let's cruise into our final scene, drifting through time and myth to gently uncover the stories behind Pokémon's legendary trios. Whether they're birds, beasts, or golems, each one carries whispers of ancient legend. Tonight, we'll rest easy while we explore their softly echoed inspirations, quiet folklore, elemental forces, and a little creative whimsy, of course. We'll begin in the snowy heights of Generation Y1 with the Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres trio. These legendary birds represent ice, electricity, and fire, three classical elements that seem to pulse through human imagination, just as they pulse through Pokémon designs. Articuno, the ice bird, derives its name from Arctic and uno, the Spanish word for one. It's the first of the trio and lives in frozen regions. But the concept goes deeper than just bird on ice. In some Slavic myths, there's a creature called the firebird, a shimmering, magical bird associated with sunrise, rebirth, and enchantment. Articuno may be the North's opposite reflection, a silent guardian of winter's hush, a crystal envoy who flies through snowstorms, no sound but the swirling wind. Zapdos blends zap and doze, and we see electricity crackling in its jagged wing feathers. Lightning birds appear in myths from cultures around the world. Thor's hammer-wielding eagle, the thunderbirds of Native American legend, the Shinto Raiju. These are symbols of power and sudden change, not unlike the booming display of Zapdos in a storm. Put your head in the clouds too long, and you might just hear its wings. Moltres, fire incarnate, comes from molt or molten and tres. It's the phoenix in flock form, a bird born from flame, reborn from ashes. All three birds together are echoes of elemental symphony, frost, lightning, and flame, each born of human fascination with extremes given life in feathered form. We now lean forward a little into the Yorkto region, where its legendary trio moved from birds to beasts. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Each carries electricity, fire, and water. Again, the classic trinity of forces, but now grounded in more terrestrial, at times regal, forms. Raikou is named from the Japanese word raiko, which means thunder. It resembles a saber-toothed tiger with sparks dancing across its back, an embodiment of raw, fleeting electric energy. It's like lightning captured in fur. Entei is more primal, a great beast of flame. Some say it's modeled after volcanic gods, an animated rumble of molten power. There are legends of guardian beasts that roar as a volcano awakens. And Entei perfectly channels that ancient heartbeat from deep in Earth's core. Suicune, with its graceful watery form and north wind motif, calls to mind purification myths worldwide. Its name comes partly from the Japanese suikon, meaning purification of evil or sin. In folklore, water often carries meaning of cleansing and renewal. Suicune is water given wings, a living fountain of quiet grace. Again, we see elemental balance, electricity in fur, flame in fur, and a river in fur. They're not just about power, they're about harmony. Jump ahead now, gently, to Hoen's legendary trio, Regirock, Regis, and Registeel. These creatures manifest rock, ice, and steel or metal. Not voices of mythic singing, but embodiments of substance. They're the architect's elements, the builders of creation. Regirock is the ground, the mountain's heartbeat, the stone unshaken. Regis, crystal slow growth and frozen patience, reflects themes in nature's slow glacial sculpting. Registeel, polished and reflective, hints at human ingenuity in craftsmanship and alchemy. They're guardians of ancient ruins, lone sentinels in abandoned temples, untouched by time, yet mysterious in purpose. Their sigils, inscribed as braille-like dots on their bodies, might nod to coded knowledge or hidden lore. The mystery remains, intact, silent, enigmatic, quietly influential. We now drift into the legendary cats of Sinnoh, Raiku's spiritual cousins uttering thunder, while Entei's flame finds a twin in Hitran. But our story tonight focuses on that geno-sealed trio. So instead, let's glide across a little to Unova's legendary dragon, trio Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem. Here is the poetic representation of truth, ideals, and absence or cold. In Johto we saw beasts. Now in Unova, its concepts rendered in dragon form. Reshiram and Zekrom mirror each other, white versus black, yin versus yang, balance versus ambition. Their modern myth made, majestic, said to have brought fire and lightning to ancient Unova, according to local legends. Their designs nod to Eastern dragon, forms, long-bodied, regal, winged serpents, but reimagined with futuristic wisdom. Kyurem, however, is the husk between them, the shell or remainder left behind when the two trios diverged. In some interpretations, it represents loss, incompleteness, or transformation, a silent third wheel with a lonely, haunting soul. Each trio's underlying theme shifts from simple elemental code to complex moral and philosophical landscapes. Unova tells stories of choices. Sinnoh offers redemption. These legacies echo through our dreams long after we close our eyes. Finally, let's step softly into Alola, where the legendary trio takes the form of guardian gods. Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, and Tapu Fini. Now we're past 3. Yes, I know our scene is about trios, but it's worth quietly mentioning them. They feel like protective spirits, melodic whispers of volcanic eruptions and sandy shores. And they remind us that as we drift through the world of Pokémon, one region's trio can be another region's quartet or quintet, depending on how they feel. Beyond those guardians, there is also the Xerneas, Yveltal, Zygarde trio, more philosophical elemental forces, life, destruction, and order. They feel like something for another nighttime tale, though. Let's keep tonight's journey gentle. As we drift to a close, let's reflect on the soothing idea that each of these legendary trios, bird, beast, golem, roots in something ancient. Whether a piece of folklore or a spark from a creator's imagination, they are born of humankind's timeless relationship with the elements and nature's silent laws. Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, legends you might whisper to a tapping forest wind. Raikou, Entei, Suicune, beasts that embody lightning, fire, and cleansing water, still as the mountains and valleys they guard. Regirock, Regis, Registeel, the primal shapes that built worlds, told in stone, crystal, and iron. These legendary Pokémon exist not only in code or card decks. They dwell in our collective memory of fire, frost, and stone. They teach us about balance and duality, fragility and strength, creation and stillness. And now, as this final scene folds softly around us, we can rest, knowing that every spark, every surge of water, every glint of metal has a story, a whisper of myth that drifts into dreams just before we close our eyes. Thank you for sharing this gentle exploration of legendary origins. May you sleep peacefully, carried by wind, waves, rock, and dream. And then we arrive at one of the more recent but no less mysterious, legendary trios, the forces of nature. Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, these stormy beings might look like flying genies crossed with angry clouds, but their design is rooted in old Japanese mythology. They're inspired by kami, Shinto spirits, specifically the gods of thunder, wind, and fertility. Their cloud throne, aesthetics, and elemental themes pay homage to those ancient deities, while still looking like they could start a rock band called the Thunderous Three. What's interesting about them is how their Therian forms, those animal-like versions, draw inspiration from creatures like birds and big cats, connecting modern legend with ancient folklore. Even their personalities are a little extra. Thundurus is like that cousin who always arrives during a storm and ruins the power supply. Tornadus just spirals. And Landorus, well, he's supposed to be the one keeping the other two in line. Basically, he's the oldest sibling trying to stop a thunderstorm from arguing with a tornado. The fact that these legendary Pokémon aren't just random forces of nature, but also tied deeply to agricultural myths, helping crops grow, punishing overuse of land, and balancing weather, makes them feel like something out of a soft-spoken bedtime fable. They aren't just here to battle, they're woven into the world's balance, echoing old legends where storms were both feared and respected. And in classic Pokémon style, you can still put them in a Pokeball and have them do backflips on command. It's wild. Pokémon manages to distill the most intense natural forces into something both powerful and cuddly. That's a kind of magic all its own. Just like how the Reggie Trio connects to deep-time myths and the birds to the frozen edges of the skies, the forces of nature anchor us to the clouds and to the long-standing human habit of looking to the weather and seeing not chaos, but stories. There's a kind of peace in that, isn't there? That even within a franchise of battles, badges, and berry blends, there are quiet threads of myth and memory woven into every design choice. It reminds us that even in a world filled with fire-breathing, dragons, and telepathic cats, the deepest magic might just come from old tales passed down and reimagined through the lens of wonder. So the next time you catch a legendary Pokémon, whether it's soaring above the mountain peaks or snoozing in a cave, waiting for a flute solo, just remember, you're not just catching pixels. You're holding onto a whisper of something ancient, and that, my friend, is a comforting thought to fall asleep to. And just like that, we've reached the end of our cozy journey together. 2 hours of gentle facts, forgotten lore, curious legends, and soft whispers from a world filled with wonder, friendship, and maybe a few too many spooky Pokédex entries. Whether you're still awake, drifting in and out, or fast asleep with Pikachu dreams swirling in your mind, I'm so glad you joined me. We've wandered through glitchy memories like Missing No, stared into the eyes of ghostly Pokémon with too much backstory for bedtime, and even followed Pikachu through tales of near mascot replacements and outer space Pokeballs. And honestly, it's wild to think how something that started as a simple Game Boy title turned into a universe big enough to explore like this. Pokémon is more than just battles and badges. It's bedtime stories disguised as facts. It's folklore dressed up in 8-bit sprites and shiny evolutions. It's a reminder that even the smallest things, like a ditto with a weird grin or a region's weather pattern, can hold stories deeper than they seem. And isn't that a nice way to see the world? Like every little detail, every strange design choice, every funny name has meaning tucked beneath the surface. It gives a sense of comfort, a sense that everything, even the strangest lore about sentient balloons and shadowy spirits, fits somewhere in the bigger picture, kind of like you. You're part of this quiet little Pokémon world, too. Every time you replay an old game, hum a battle theme, or tell someone about the truck hiding Mew, you're keeping that magic alive. Just like the myths in these stories, it lingers because we share it, dream with it, and carry it into our own peaceful corners of the night. And if you've made it this far, still cozy under the covers, then maybe, just maybe, you've been reminded of your own first steps into the tall grass, the moment you met your starter, the sound of the Pokémon Center chime in the dead of night, The time you accidentally used your master ball on a wild Pidgey. Yeah, we've all been there. Hopefully these facts didn't just inform you. They wrapped you up like a warm blanket of nostalgia and tucked you in with a smile. This sleepy little video will be here whenever you need a moment to slow down, to unwind, or to remember that even digital monsters can be old friends. So whether you're dozing now or planning to rewatch this again tomorrow night, just know you're always welcome here. Our cozy community of sleepy trainers is growing, and there's always room for one more next to the campfire. If you feel like sharing, I'd still love to know where you're listening from and what time it was when you started this journey tonight. It always warms my heart to see how far our sleepy Pokémon world reaches. But for now, close your eyes if they are not closed already. Let the music carry you just a little further. Let the day fade behind you, and let dreams filled with forests, legends, and glowing Pokeballs drift in. Sleep well, sleepyhead. Until next time, good night.